Chinatown, downtown, and priorities around town. This week, Executive Committee looked at progress in Chinatown and a downtown housing incentive.
Plus, Council released its strategic priorities for the term ahead of budget planning.
Hi, I'm Mac.
I'm Stephanie.
And we're
Speaking Municipally.
Welcome back to Speaking Municipally, episode 346. I got a little congestion going on, Stephanie. I'm feeling like the winter illness has really hit me this year, but as we're recording this, it's beautiful outside. It's sunny. It's above 0 degrees.
Hey, maybe climate change. Climate change is kind of cool in that way. No, I'm just joking. Every year, though, you mentioned being congested. Like when we have our fake spring, when it goes up to like 17
False
degrees
spring.
for a few days and then goes back down, it always makes me so sick. And I think it's because like everything melts a little bit, and then all of the spring allergies, and then I'm like, I can't breathe for 2 weeks. So that's probably coming to me next week.
Yeah, I do get really bad seasonal allergies. And I have found actually the more false springs we have, the little bit easier it is to manage because you don't get hit with it all at once,
Microdosing
microdosing of the allergies. That's right, the allergens. Probably not so great for our hardworking city staff who have to deal with the constant freeze, thaw, and melt, more snow, all that kind of stuff. And as a pedestrian, or a cyclist or anybody who's not in a vehicle especially, it's pretty challenging to traverse in these kinds of conditions. Another sign that spring is coming is the return of Downtown Dining Week. So here's our ad for this week's episode.
This episode is brought to you by the Edmonton Downtown Business Association, which is putting on Downtown Dining Week from March 11th to 22nd. More than 65 restaurants are participating in this year's event, offering multi-course and multi-item menus at a discount. The menus are now live at edmontondowntown.com/diningweek. Mac, did you say any deals that intrigue you?
Well, I'm one of those people that's so boring. I like my usual favorites, right? And I have to really be in a mood to go and try something brand new. And of course, being a downtown resident, I've tried a lot of the places downtown. But my favorite, of course, Rosewood Foods. I've probably talked about on the show many times before. I love Rosewood. All the things they make are fantastic. Their breakfast sandwich is fantastic. And that is the brunch deal for Downtown Dining Week. So if you've never given them a try, I encourage you to check it out. How about you, Stephanie?
I haven't tried Rosewood, so maybe that'll be one of them.
Good excuse.
You said that you always go for the same places. I also chose somewhere that I go very often, Foos Repair Shop. Love it there. So cool. Such good food. Really reasonable, and especially the deals that they got going on. Yeah, love Foos.
Foos is great as well.
So this is Edmonton's largest dining week, and it's a great way to support locally owned restaurants in the heart of the city. Discover your new favorite dish today at edmontondowntown.com/diningweek. That's edmontondowntown.com/diningweek.
Thanks for that, Stephanie. Chinatown was at council or at executive committee, and they were talking all about the Chinatown strategy, which we've discussed several times over the last number of years on the show. Stephanie, what did executive committee hear and discuss this week?
Yeah, so it's an annual update on the Chinatown strategy. So in the report, administration highlighted a couple of things. Construction of the new Harbin Gate is expected to begin this month-ish, somewhere very soon. The previous gate, of course, was removed in 2017 during construction of the Valley Line Southeast LRT. So sad, because can you imagine how cool it would be to have like the train coming in under the gate? Would have been very neat if they could have incorporated that into the design. But anyways, the new gate will be built on 97th Street between Jasper Ave and 101A Avenue, where the original Chinatown began. So I guess that's nice that there's a bit of that historical connection. And then some other highlights. Administration said that the Chinatown Transformation Collaborative is working with the U of A to create a tourism strategy for the neighborhood. Some other highlights from 2025, the city renovated Mary Burley Park. They worked with the Chinatown Business Improvement Association to retain businesses, and they advanced neighborhood renewal with a focus on walkability, accessibility, and streetscape quality.
Yeah, I think the renovation of Mary Burley Park was a pretty big deal, right? That had long been a problem spot in Chinatown, and to see that project completed and moved forward is pretty encouraging. And this follows, of course, the demolition of the old Remand Center. Like, there's been quite a bit of physical change around there, but I think there are still so many things facing Chinatown. Like, there's, anytime these kinds of updates come back on a strategy like this, there's obviously going to be some wins. There's some things that we have done, but there's still a lot of work to do. the gate having not been installed for all of that time.
Almost 10 years.
It's crazy.
That's
That's a
very
long
sad.
time. There's been lots of events over the last couple of years where there's been city staff and others there to show you what it's gonna look like and to talk about the new design, but still, it's not there. So I'm glad to
Mhm.
hear that that's gonna finally move forward. What else did executive committee hear, maybe from the community itself, in this update?
Well, basically, they all said something along the lines of what you just said, is that this is great and we need more. Thank you, more please.
Mm.
A ton of members of the Chinatown community, and it was both kind of the official heads of like organizations, but also just people that live there. They came to share how they thought things are going. So many members said, "Yeah, thanks. Thanks for what you're doing, but we have some gaps to fill." And a lot of them were just little things that make a big difference. Like, for example, garbage cans are not being emptied. People are not littering. We love that. But then they go to put it in the garbage can and it's full and overflowing. That's just like one example. Neighborhood renewal is ongoing. That's great. We're going to have nice new sidewalks. But because it's a construction zone, it looks terrible in the short term. There's stuff sticking out of the sidewalk and whatnot. Vibrancy funding is great. It helps bring people there and, put on these great like Lunar New Year events, like the Chinatown After Dark kind of events. But at the same time, a lot of the members were just asking for more police presence. Another thing that came up was the 101 Street dedicated bus lane. So that's kind of on the uh, boundary of Chinatown. It's not right on like the 97th Street where they have those like beautiful decorative lampposts and everything, but it's still part of it. Some of the businesses along that stretch, like Tan, Padmanati, that record store, they've lost some parking spots because of that, because of this lane.
Right, and it sounds like council is going to be taking another look at the bus lane issue, right?
Yeah, so part of the discussion, involved, someone, Rizwan Mahuiddin, who represents those businesses, said that the bus lane conversion was like bike lanes on steroids, which I just
Bike
thought
lanes on steroids.
which I just thought was a great turn of phrase. And m- a lot of those businesses are accessed by seniors with mobility issues, so it's really helpful to have that parking right out front. There's parking around the back in the alleyways, but in these presentations, they attached pictures of what those alleyways look like. And as you can imagine, not super clean, folks sheltering back there, which is not ideal, overflowing dumpsters, not ideal. So, Ward Carrillo counselor Karen Tang confirmed that they're reviewing this bus lane at the March 23rd committee meeting. So, and they could potentially reverse that decision.
Yeah, okay, well, that's encouraging to hear that they're gonna take a look at that. It's a little bit of, the more things change, the more things stay the same. That's what's coming to mind here, right? So you mentioned, the fund and some of the great things that it's supported. I'm thinking of the Van Block
Yeah.
parties, To Gather. There was that great Lunar New Year event that just happened at the Royal Alberta Museum. My family and I got to go to that. It was really great to have so many people. Like the place was absolutely packed. So many people. There's been lots of really positive, encouraging things, but the things that haven't changed are the things that people complained about or raised concerns about when the Chinatown strategy was first being developed, right? Which is the high concentration of social service agencies,
Mhm.
which directly affects that perception of safety, if not also the real safety when you're in the area. The cleanliness, of course. We've talked about encampments over the years and tents and things like that, and 106th Avenue continues to be primarily a place for people who have nowhere else to go
Yeah.
rather than people who are coming to Chinatown for tourism or business purposes, right? And so that's a real challenge. And then I'm going to jump ahead here in the conversation because I think another thing that remains the same about Chinatown. Mary Burley Park was a great advancement, but that 97th Street bridge
Yep.
is still there. And from the very early days of what should we do about Chinatown, the conversation has been that bridge has got to go. Something's got to happen with that bridge because it divides North Chinatown, which is the economic one, the one we think about with, the decorative lighting like you talked about, a lot of the restaurants up 97th Street, and South Chinatown, which is the historic cultural Chinatown, closer to what you think of as the quarters and the armature, that area. And the bridge is this unnecessary divide between the two. Taproot did some reporting about this in our Moment in History series. Looking way back in 1929, it was called the 97th Street Subway. They didn't call them underpasses at the time. And at the time it made sense, but in 2026 it really doesn't. In 2016 it didn't. The only thing we got between now and then was this living bridge project that lasted for 2.5 years,
Yeah.
where there was community gardens and things like that installed on the bridge to make it a little bit more inviting. But those sorts of placemaking initiatives they only go so far. We talked about this a little bit last episode. The bridge is still a division of the Chinatowns. It's still a barrier to get into Chinatown. It's still a place for waste and other things to accumulate underneath the bridge, which make it very uninviting. The 3,000 people or whatever that were at the Royal Alberta Museum, how many of them actually, went around the corner, went down under the 97th Street Bridge and up into Chinatown? And if they did, what kind of experience did they have, right? So lots of great things happening, but lots of the same problems remain. So, with that bit of context, I gather that council did talk about, or executive committee did talk about the 97th Street Bridge a little bit.
Yes, they did. So I also want to just clarify, this is the bridge. It used to be for rail. And also, I think another important piece of context is that I've seen in years past, it can also be a place where a ton of houseless folks will set up encampments because it's like a kind of central place and like it's flat and everything. So at the end of the conversation, the committee passed a unanimous motion. It was a three-part motion. So the first was that administration work with Chinatown community groups to explore a community cleanup program focused on Chinatown and prepare some funding options so that addresses the overflowing garbage can issue. And then they didn't, I think what would, it's not in this motion, but I think what will be included is Mayor Knack was like, okay, so we empty the transit garbage cans once a week, but the street ones every day. Can we just do them all every day? Like again, like those little tiny weird things that can we just fix those? So I think that would be maybe that's already in the works, but that was
That
kind of the
should
vibe I
be.
got. Yeah.
That should be, right? This is one of those, like, do we need a community cleanup program, or do we just need to prioritize and better operationalize the thing that is already a city responsibility? Like, I think this is the very slippery slope that we have gone on downtown, where instead of having the city fund and do that work, or having businesses take ownership directly and do it, we rely on philanthropic funding in a way
Yeah.
to fund the downtown cleanup crew. And we don't have that crew in all these other neighborhoods. So what do we do in a neighborhood like Chinatown, which is facing the same problem, but doesn't have the same kind of supports or resources available, right? So
Yeah.
hopefully the city can address that. Okay, so that was part one of the motion. What else did they decide?
Part two was that administration work with Qualico and adjacent landowners to prepare options and analysis for the improvement or removal of the 97th Street Bridge, including costs, potential funding sources, legal implications, and other considerations, and return with a report about either improving or destroying the bridge. Because I guess there's some sort of ownership, like they don't really know who owns this because Qualico has their development right there and it's just kind of unclear and confusing who owns it. So they're trying to figure that out.
You know what that sounds like to me, Stephanie?
Hmm.
A really poor excuse to just not take action. Like, at the end of the day, I find it really hard to believe that whether the city owns it or Qualico owns it or the province owns it, that anyone would be happy with it staying. Qualico wants their developments to be successful. The city wants Chinatown to be successful. Everybody would benefit from the removal of this bridge. So I really hope this motion ends up on the destroy the bridge part of it, not the improve the bridge part of it. And let's not use this, I don't know who owns it, as an excuse to
Just
prevent
get rid of it.
further action. Just do something about it.
Yeah,
I recognize there's going to be a cost and all those kinds of things, but there's already a cost. We're just
mhm,
not paying for it directly, right? And so let's just do that properly.
totally. And I want to say that, I if you take away all of the kind of negative connotations, I do think as an infrastructure nerd that it's a cool thing and that if the if it fit better into the neighborhood and it wasn't so such like a magnet for I don't know, just I think that I wish that it could be a cool thing to have, like, this nice green bridge over a big street. So, part of me is, like, very naively hoping that maybe there's an option for improvement, but, like, no, realistically, it should probably just be torn down, unfortunately. It reminds me of the rat hole that they used to have, on 109th Street that, like, I think
Yeah.
that's an interesting piece of infrastructure, but in the end, gotta go.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. They're very interesting pieces of infrastructure. It'd be cool if there was maybe this is a failure of imagination, right? To
Yeah,
do something, but anything that is going to be imaginative enough to address the issues that that bridge brings into play is probably going to cost more
yeah,
than it would just cost to get rid of it, right? So that's a challenge for sure. And this is why we have museums and
yeah.
history articles and other cultural assets to remember things like the rat hole without having to deal with the challenges they provide day to day, right?
Yeah, it's kinda sad. And then the third part of the motion was that administration provide a report with options and analysis for a housing incentive in the quarters area and return with options for funding, etc.
Music to my ears. Housing incentives. That's what I've been all about lately. So that's fantastic. I hope that there's money put toward that. There is other money coming to Chinatown, though, right?
Yeah, so the applications for the like existing Chinatown Vibrancy Fund just closed a little while ago. So that would again bring those kind of events, like you said, Van Block together. And this
Chinatown Chowdown. Like there's a whole bunch of things. The Dragon Boat Festival, I
Mhm.
think, was supported quite extensively through that fund.
Yeah, exactly. And then, these things are usually funded a couple years at a time. So for the 2027 to 2030 budget deliberations, which are coming up in December, council has asked administration to bring options forward for how do we extend this.
And this would be, if I read correctly somewhere, I think it was $500,000 a year, so like about $2 million over the next budget cycle for the Chinatown Vibrancy Fund.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, look forward to that, and I look forward to finding out who got the most recent round of funding
Mhm.
as well, and hopefully, a lot of those things we've talked about that have been so positive for Chinatown can either keep going or build on the previous success. Maybe we'll get some new things in there as well. So that's fantastic.
Right.
Anything else about Chinatown come up this week?
Yeah. So, on a sadly related note, this week, Justin Bone, the man who is accused of killing two men in Chinatown in May 2022, he testified in court. So, you know, that incident, that horrible tragedy was part of like the big spark that led to a lot of this because that was around the time where um like the provincial government said came in and said that city council needs to come up with a safety plan. And this was part of it, the Chinatown vibrancy funding and stuff. So if you don't remember, maybe you didn't live in Edmonton at the time. On May 18th, 2022, Hung Trang, who was 64, and Ban Phak Huang, who was 61, they were found fatally injured in their businesses in Chinatown. And the man accused of this, Justin Bone, he's fired four of his lawyers over the course of the last, I guess, nearly 4 years now, and some of them several times. And it's just been delayed, and it's getting to a point where they're risking like a miscarriage of justice sort of thing. I mean, this is not a law podcast, but
Yeah.
it's getting to a point where the trial is taking a really long time. And I can only imagine that the families and the entire community just want this to be put behind them. And we'll have some links in the show notes, and you can read up on what's going on with that court case.
Yeah, very interesting. It is an unfortunate but real connection
Mhm.
to all of the vibrancy activity that has gone on in Chinatown in the last several years. You're right, that was really a catalyst and accelerant for a lot of the things that have subsequently happened, and it's unfortunate that it was a tragedy that did that, but hopefully we can get some closure to that. Okay, well, I was celebrating the potential for a housing incentive in Chinatown. Last week you promised there might be some news about a downtown housing incentive,
Mhm.
and you're here to deliver.
Yes. So, executive committee took a look at the downtown attainable housing incentive. Basically, TLDR is it's expected to fund between 570 and 850 units that are fixed at about 30% of Edmonton's median renter income. We'll get into a little bit more of the specifics later. Is a little bit more complicated than that, but basically, they're hoping that this will help with a couple hundred attainable, quote unquote, attainable units, but then overall, thousands of units in the buildings overall. The incentive would be funded through the Extended Downtown Community Revitalization Levy, which, of course, council approved in the summer. And it was a bit controversial at the time because it involved giving some public money to the Cates Group to build that downtown event park. But here we are. This is one of the things that was promised. This was one a bit of the like the sugar that was included in the medicine, if you want to use
Yeah.
that analogy. So it's structured as a 10-year tax rebate, and applicants are required to construct a new rental building. So no upgrades, office to resi conversions, with at least 25% of units meeting the attainable housing criteria for at least 10 years. That criteria is different from affordable. Affordable typically means like it's fixed at a certain amount, and usually it involves like much deeper subsidy, affordable housing. But the for this particular project, it's calculated around the maximum one-bedroom apartment rent in downtown Edmonton. So it's kind of convoluted. I'm about to say a bunch of numbers. A studio can be rented for 85% of the maximum one bed. A two-bedroom can be rented for 125% of the maximum one bed, and I just won't go on. A three-bedroom is a little bit more. So, essentially, what this means is that these brand new sparkly units created with the incentive will be rented for around the same price as existing downtown apartments. Slightly more, but not quite as much as what a brand new downtown apartment typically goes for.
Let's
Yeah.
ignore the numbers. You've got a handy chart here that we'll link to in the show notes. This is from the presentation that administration made. So, what you're really saying here is that attainable in this context means these rents will be a little bit higher than the average rent for all of downtown,
Mhm.
but not as high as other new buildings. So if I were to build a new building today, at full market rates, I could charge quite a bit more than what the average is.
Exactly.
And so attainable means you won't have to pay quite as much. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. So, take for example, there's a couple new brand new like quote unquote luxury high rises. That term gets thrown around a lot. And there's a couple of those downtown that are brand new, and you'd expect those new buildings to be going for, for a one bed it's a little over 1500, 1600. But an existing one bedroom from an old building, like I used to live in Edmonton House, an older building from like the 60s or 70s, and the rent around there is, 1200-ish. So the idea for this program is that they're fixing it at a little bit higher than those old buildings from the 60s and 70s, and you can't go as high as the brand new luxury high rises. And part of the idea of that is, I mean, these developers are getting an incentive, a financial incentive, but at the same time, it's helping the financials work out for them because, like, existing rents downtown, if they don't have any other incentives, are not enough to make housing projects downtown work out. So, by keeping it a little bit higher than an old building downtown, it's supposed to make the financials work out better. This is the impression that I got from the presentation that administration made, and that it's kind of almost a win-win, or like trying to please the developers by giving them a little bit higher than existing, but then also making, these brand new sparkly units with like in-suite laundry, probably has like a hot tub in the as an amenity. You know what I mean? Like these like nicer buildings for much cheaper than you'd normally be able to move into them.
Yeah, another way to say this is what it looks like they're trying to say in the presentation, which is that we have this desire to hit, tens of thousands of more people living downtown, 24,000 by 2030. And the current market conditions just aren't going to be enough to do that. So we've got
Yep.
to incentivize it in some way. This housing incentive is one of the first real practical ways we can do this. We've got the student housing incentive that we talked about previously, but this is another way to do that. And there's also in the presentation that we'll link to a pretty helpful graphic that shows, that they are taking the uplift that would all go to CRL revenue. That's how the CRL works, right? You get more tax revenue as a result of the improvements that have been made because instead of an empty lot, have a building. Instead of all of that going into the CRL, we're basically saying most of it goes to the CRL, but we're going to keep some of it back for this housing incentive. And
Yeah.
that's how we'll pay it back over time, which is good.
Yeah.
So it's a way to both increase the amount of housing that we're getting downtown. It says up to 3,400 total units, which, could be almost 5,000 people potentially if it was fully built out that are living downtown. So that's significant, but also a way to make sure that all the housing we're building is not super luxury, like you're saying, and that people can actually afford to live there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this sounds encouraging. I presume executive committee did something positive with this. Fingers crossed.
All of the counselors said we don't want people to live downtown. And
Oh,
no, I'm just kidding. Obviously, it was approved. And so what's going to happen next is it goes from committee to council, and council, I'm assuming, will give it the rubber stamp. And
yeah, because it's related to the CRL, it needs full council approval.
yeah.
So that'll happen at a upcoming meeting here right away. Okay, well, that's really encouraging.
Mhm. And I wanted to say one more thing about this one issue that so obviously like Build, DBA, all of these groups came out to talk about this and said we mostly kind of similar to Chinatown. We like this, but we want more.
Yeah.
And one of the things was that the boundary for the housing incentive does not include all of downtown. Notably, it doesn't really include like the very, very center of downtown, like 102 Ave and 101 Street, does not include the BMO site, the arts driven parking lot. So yeah, it is limited. It takes when you take out every lot that you take out, that's one fewer lot that you can build a new tower on, right?
And that's presumably because this is related to the CRL. This
Mhm.
is not money that is in general revenue. This is CRL revenue, and that means it's got to fall under the CRL boundary. Is that right?
Yeah. So the CRL boundary does not align perfectly with the downtown neighborhood boundary. So yeah, not every lot is eligible for this or anything to do with the CRL.
Okay. Well, thank you for that update on housing. Next, we want to talk about something that we talked to the mayor about the last time we interviewed him. He promised that this council was going to set some priorities or a different strategic framework, a different way for them to make decisions. And they've now followed through. They've done that.
Mhm.
So I saw the mayor post about this on LinkedIn, and then Postmedia did some reporting. So we'll put some links in the show notes for you. But they have agreed to 4 strategic priorities for this council term. So economic development, growth management, quality services, and safety. Those are the 4. And then they've also agreed to 3 guiding principles: affordability, fiscal sustainability, and relationship driven. And so the mayor basically said, when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And that's what this is meant to do. It's meant to bring some clarification to the decisions that they have to make about budgets and the limited ability they have to spend on things in the next 4 years. What are they going to put to the top of the list if they have to choose between two things? How do they make the decision between those two things? I gather that these strategic priorities and these guiding principles are intended to be the way that they answer that, right? So I'm thinking about this as a little bit of a lens. So when he first talked about this, I was confused, and then we might have talked about this on the show. I said, like, we already have a vision. Council already has a strategic document that they've approved. We already have city plan. We have these things, and so it's not meant to replace that long-term vision. It's really just meant to bring some clarity to decision making in the shorter term, is the way that I understand these strategic priorities. So I have thoughts about this, but first, Stephanie, I thought I'd give you an opportunity to share what you think.
Honestly, I don't really understand the point of these kinds of exercises in any situation because I feel like, big companies and like institutions, post-secondary, even arts organizations, they always come up with these strategic priorities. And honestly, they're just really vague in any situation. And now in this situation, like of course they're gonna say that affordability and safety is important. They're not gonna say, "I wish that the city was more expensive and less safe." I don't know. Maybe I'm just being cynical, but, like, I just think that, like, every single thing that council decides could be justified using one of these priorities. For example, if they're approving a new neighborhood that just sprawls and sprawls, they're managing growth because they're making space for new Edmontonians to live. And it's even economic development because they're creating, like, new housing, but then also making infill way easier could be also seen as managing growth because they're managing growing up instead of out. Something like funding anti-racism initiatives, which was a big thing for former Mayor Amarjeet Sohi, that could be filed under safety and building relationships, but it could also be taken away under fiscal sustainability. I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'm just being too cynical, but I truly just don't see these strategic priorities having any impact on council decisions. I think that this is like I'm being so uncharacteristically negative right now,
I love
but
it.
but but like I I honestly just think this is something that they did at the beginning of the term and then it's gonna go sit on a shelf and get dusty. I would
Hmm.
love to be proven wrong, but again, it's just so vague. Like anything that they decide, literally anything they could decide could be fit under any of those priorities.
I think it's a fair point. They are very high level
Mhm.
and very vague. I too will watch with interest to see if these things just get shelved or if they actually follow through. I saw in some of the reporting that the mayor was pleased that Councillor Tang already had referenced these in a subsequent discussion, you know, basically saying if we approve these, like, does this support economic development or whatever? I think the mayor talked about the economic development one in an interesting way. So perhaps it's not surprising. Every city is going to say that they care
Mhm.
about economic development. But his point is that it hasn't ever really felt like a priority. It hasn't been brought to the level of this is why we're making this decision and why we're deciding against these other things. And so from his point of view, you know, bringing these priorities together is a way to provide that clarity to people. But as you say, they're pretty vague, and you could argue that a decision is going to fall under one of them. There's two other things I wanted to say about these strategic priorities. So one is it's interesting what's not prioritized. And so climate change stood out
Mhm.
to me right away. And so you might look at this and just say, well, that's because climate change is already agreed to be a sort of foundational thing. It's part of every decision that we make. You know, there's that little section on the bottom of every report. But I'm not sure the evidence supports that assertion, right? So I don't know about that. So why isn't climate a priority? Why isn't that one of the top level priorities for them? So that's one thing. It's like there's a lot of stuff that is missing here. And then back to your point about is this just a empty exercise that organizations do? I understand, I think, better in the business context, right? Like when you have the ability to do everything, you end up doing nothing and you really need to say no to stuff. Like I've learned this the hard way about being an entrepreneur. Most of your success is going to come from what you say no to, and that you have to find a way to focus in on the things that are going to give you the best return or take advantage of the current context the best. And you just can't say yes to everything as much as you want to. You just can't. And nothing will move forward if you do that. So I think it's pretty powerful that city council tried to bring that kind of thinking to its work and that they're able to agree and narrow it down to just four priorities. I think that's kind of impressive, right? There's a long history of much smarter people than I talking about how, you know, editing is about removing everything until you get to the point where nothing else can be removed. That's when you know it's done, right? Steve Jobs famously coming back to Apple, making the product line so simple. Like there's lots and lots of examples, but they're all based in business. And the city is not really a business. I'm not sure council has the luxury of saying, we're not going to care about that. We're only going to care about these things. Like they have to care about all of the things that our public dollars fund. And so I think that will make it very challenging for them to actually put this into practice especially as they start getting into budget decisions, which is a very different thing, as we know, than priorities or visions or strategies or plans. Like this is where the rubber hits the road. Where are you actually going to spend your money? That's where you get to actually put that into action. So I think it'll be challenging. I'm a bit more optimistic than you, Stephanie, maybe that this will be a useful tool. But I guess we'll get a first test here this year because the 4-year budget cycle's coming up.
Yes, exactly, and that also, was discussed at length this week at council. It's actually as we're recording, they're probably still talking about it because this week they started their quote unquote "zero-based budget process." That's not really a zero-based budget process. They've been talking about this for years. Actually, Andrew Knack and Tim Cartmel kinda collaborated on something when they were counselors together to get this sort of budget process going. Essentially, what they wanted was start from 0 and we add things on bit by bit by bit and do, like, the line by line, every dollar the city spends. That's not really possible for several reasons, especially it would take, like, so long to develop this. So, what they are now using is a results-based budget process. That's what administration is calling it. So, what's happening this month, at 5 or 6 meetings throughout the rest of the month is that staff from each city department and branch will present a line by line budget and information on the funding model, key drivers of cost increases, structural budget variances, staffing composition, outputs and deliverables, services, service levels, benchmark comparisons with other municipalities, and audit information where applicable.
Bingo. Bingo. I got the drinking bingo. Service levels,
Yeah.
budget variances. I got all the keywords.
Okay, perfect. So they have 6 days throughout the month to do this, and then after that, administration and the mayor and the ward councilor apparently are gonna go do in-person engagement sessions around the city. I want more information about that. I think that's gonna be interesting, very Parks and Rec. As I mentioned, I love that show, but yeah, so that's what they started doing this month.
Okay. And so we've got a few months of this engagement to happen, lots of other reports and things to come. Uh, Anything strike you as missing so far?
Yes. So, the Edmonton Police Service is not included in this presentation, the largest line item in the city's budget, and other agencies, boards, and commissions. So I don't think the library's in there because they're under a different governance structure and their funding is decided in a different way.
Yeah.
Also, utility related because technically utility is kind of like a separate budget. It's
Yep.
just a little bit complicated. So they are still going to touch on these areas, of course, but not until September. And then honestly, I was surprised to not see more pushback about the police not being included, though I guess they're respecting the governance model. And Mayor Andrew Knack did ask if police and like the police commission, the funding body, are going to be involved in these engagement sessions over the next few months. And the commission already does their own engagement, but admin said that they're working to kind of involve the commission in that.
And you said these initial presentations are starting as we're recording this today, Thursday and Friday. So we
Yeah.
should know a little bit more next week potentially about what council's heard.
Yeah, so this week they started with the ones that I've listened to so far were like the office of the city manager, which is that's extremely high level. The city manager manages the city.
Yeah.
But when they get down to like, I don't know, urban planning and economy, might get a little spicy. Parks and roads, who knows? Might get a little more interesting.
Sign me up for when we have the golf courses
Oh God.
conversation. All right. Well, that was a full one, Stephanie. Lots of good stuff this week. I'm sure there'll be lots of interesting things next week. But you and I, before we get to that, as you're listening to this episode, maybe it's come out on noon on Fridays, like it always does. We're doing another edition of Taproot Exchange, which is our members only live stream that we've been doing every couple of weeks for people who are members of Taproot Edmonton. It's a way to offer a bit of perspective and bring some new voices and have a more fulsome conversation about things that are going on in the news that are kind of interesting. So let's do a little promo, Stephanie. Who are we talking to this week?
Yeah, so I think we talked about it on the podcast, and if not, you probably saw the news that the King Edward Park Community League was on the brink of closing because they didn't have any volunteers, and the existing ones were like, we can't do this anymore. And if it closed, they would have lost their tennis courts, their rink, their halls, and the community showed up. They had standing room only, a line out the door of volunteers wanting to come forward and save the league. So it's a happy, good news story. So but at the same time, I think that it kind of reveals something about what's going on with civic engagement in Edmonton. So we're going to talk to someone from the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues and someone from the new board, one of those great folks that stepped up to help save their community league. It's giving like like musical where they have to put on a talent show. Anyways, but we're going to talk to them about, what happened. Why did people show up at the last minute to save things? And also, what can other communities learn from this if they're also facing a decline in volunteers? Why are we seeing this decline in volunteers? I love this topic. It's very important to me. Community engagement, both on the kind of official level with community leagues and also on a more just informal level. So I'm obsessed with this conversation. I'm so glad we're going to be talking about it. It's going to be so cool.
If you're a Taproot member, you can listen to that. We'll have the recording available and the transcript next week. And if you're not a Taproot member, that's the kind of thing you can get access to if you join and become a member of Taproot Edmonton. You get access to Taproot Exchange as well as our weekly giveaways of tickets and perks and discounts and things like that. So it's another good reason to support Taproot and become a member.
And you can like send in questions ahead of time, or you can add questions to the live stream while we're going. We also have had interesting conversations like with the founders of RWI Synthetics, which is a really cool local startup that just launched like a new AI tool. A few weeks before that, we talked to some folks on both sides of the infill debate to ahead of those proposed changes to the zoning bylaw. Like we do really interesting conversations. It's honestly one of my favorite parts of the week is just getting to nerd out on these things for an hour. So definitely would recommend subscribing.
We'd love to have you join us. But of course, you can always join us here every week as well as we dig into what's happening around City Hall. We'll be back again next week with another episode of Speaking Municipally. Until then, I'm Mac.
I'm Stephanie.
And we're
Speaking Municipally.
Municipally.